G'day, I'm Peter Anthony. Welcome to Growth Tales. Mike Handcock is a global business leader with 7 international bestsellers. Today we're talking about ancient wisdom, and he's sharing 3 key thoughts from ancient wisdom from all over the world. Here's Mike's story. G'day, Mike. You're a superbly accomplished business person, but you've got your roots in ancient wisdom. How did that come about?
I think it came about, Peter, because I read a book by a Tasmanian author when I was about 18. Her name was Dawn Hill, and the book was called On the Edge of Reality or The Edge of Reality, something like that. And it went into the unknown, astroplanes, what happens after you die, and all of those sort of things. And it's the first time I'd really been triggered on that. And at the same time as that, an associate of mine, a friend of a friend who I knew pretty well, he wasn't my personal friend, became a psychic. And literally at 18, he went from being a normal teenager to, by 19, he was one of these people helping the police find murder victims that have never shown up and things like that. So that triggered in me a desire and a hunger to find out about the things that I didn't know about, which led me to ancient wisdom. Strangely enough, I'm wearing my Pythagoras T-shirt under here today. So for those of you watching this on a video feed, and it enabled me to go deep into studying some of the ancient masters, reading all of the books, the Corpus Hermetica, the Bhagavad Gita, all of the religious books, the Bible, the Quran, etc., and traveling to 114 countries so far, many of them multiple times, and meeting with people who have got deep wisdom that comes from the past, which I think is very relevant for today.
Okay. Yeah, that's curious because typically people like me, or more typical business people or corporate people, if you like, we tend to do the corporate piece first, then we arrive at the ancient wisdom piece towards the end of the battle. But for you, it was almost from the beginning. Is that right?
Yeah, well, it's definitely close. I mean, I wouldn't say I was like a monk in my 20s or anything like that. I was a guitar player, right? And I played in a professional rock band. In fact, I still have guitars which are like only a meter away from me sort of at any time when I'm at home. So from that aspect, I was pretty normal, but I was interested in this stuff. And then when I got into my 30s, I became very interested. You know, I went to Peru and Bolivia. I went to China, and I did numerous trips. I've done numerous trips to Egypt, and I've led trips to different ancient sites in 24 countries. And those trips, strangely enough, are not full of sort of what people would think are woo-woo people. They're actually full of entrepreneurs and business leaders who are trying to get a deeper sense of understanding of themselves and the way that the world works and what's really going on in this planet and this life, that go and find their answers at different ancient sites around the world.
Yeah, I can recall Peru well. I remember I was married in the 90s, and my wife and I were both very keen meditators. And we were very keen on the dawn of the new millennium from 99 to 2000 to meditate somewhere special. So we chose Machu Picchu as a place to meditate on, like in that period. And I got very interested in how those guys went about their lives. And curiously enough, the leaders, or the spiritual leaders at Machu Picchu, they had a sense of foreboding that Machu Picchu was going to get discovered. So they left it something like 50 or 60 years before the white people got up that high into the Andes. And by then it was covered in forest. And it took quite a long time before Westerners discovered Machu Picchu and took away the forest. So there was some sense even with those guys that they had a foreboding of those lands being conquered.
Absolutely.
It's interesting. I'm just curious about whether these ancient traditions have got something in common. I mean, they're all very different, but they're also the same, aren't they, in some ways?
They're incredibly similar. And I think that's one of the biggest learnings. I mean, when Hiram Bingham discovered Machu Picchu, rediscovered it in 1911, if my memory serves me correctly, and they cut away the jungle, it was the same experience that they had when they cut away the jungle in Angkor Wat in Cambodia. So, you know, it's funny that if you live anywhere sort of semi-tropical, the jungle will take back your city in, you know, a matter of 20 years. I mean, I remember watching a BBC documentary on Kuala Lumpur and how long it would take before anybody would not know it was there if people moved out. It was a matter of 20 years. But coming back to your question, you'll find that there's certain incredible alignments of ancient sites as well, creating perfect triangles between Nazca in Peru, the pyramids and Stonehenge. So, and there's the way in which they line up is just incredible. So you can draw lines around the world and you will literally be able to join ancient sites on one meridian as you go around the world. Not all of them, because there's different meridians, but things like Easter Island and Nazca lines and Stonehenge all line up. So that means, and when you go there, most of these are solar sites, so they're aligned to the solstices. The 20th or 21st of June, 20th, 21st of December normally, for instance, or the equinoxes, which if you go to Chichen Itza, which is in the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, on the 23rd of September, it's the Temple of the Serpent, Kukulkan, and on the 23rd of September, a shadow of the serpent appears down the steps. I mean, how do you plan to build that thousands of years ago? Anybody who thinks that the Egyptians built the pyramids, just go and stand in a pyramid. Just go inside a pyramid and tell me if you think anybody could have built that.
Or ever look at the outside and see how perfectly those stones are formed and how they fit perfectly together, and each one of them weighs like 20, 30, 40, 50 tons. So you think, how did they carve them like that? And then how did they drag them, 50 kilometres, whatever that distance is from the quarry to there, and then how did they assemble it with no machinery, basically? It's pretty extraordinary.
Exactly.
What are your views on then? You think, alien intervention, or there was a different type of being around then that helped them do that? What are your thoughts?
Well, without going into super weird conspiracy stuff, I mean, there's some things that to me make sense. And that is that an Egyptian priest by the name of Manetho created a list of the kings. And if you go to Abydos in Egypt, you'll see the king list on the walls there, and that list there is the reason why all of us know that, Tutankhamun was in the 18th dynasty or whatever dynasty he was in, and so on and so forth. But what Manetho said is that before the kings came a range of demigods, and they ruled for approximately 20,000 years, and before them the gods ruled. And this is very similar to the information that came out of Sumeria, which is Iraq, and they talk about the Anunnaki, the sky gods. Probably the most realistic version for me is that there were people that lived here and they were giants. They weren't the size that we are now. And I mean, many of the giants' bodies have been found, but particularly in America, but a lot of it's been closed down now, which is there's a lot of TV shows. Everybody can go and watch it on how the giants are disappearing, their bodies are disappearing. But that range of sky gods came, and it seems that we as human beings, not the spirit of us, which I think is very different, but we in the form that we are were created in some way because just the way our DNA works, it's a manufactured scientific DNA. And all the science I've read on it definitely would appear to be the case. But, in the modern world, does that matter? I mean, those people aren't here today. If they are, people say, aliens are going to come to the earth. I always say, go to a shopping centre, you'll see plenty of them, right? They're already here amongst us. So, it's the people who simply don't look human. Just go and you'll walk past them every day. But I think what's relevant for us today, Peter, is, I think what's relevant for us today is that, there are lessons that we can take from thousands of years ago that are as applicable or more applicable today, regardless if you believe God created you or you were created by some being from Nibiru, right? It doesn't matter.
Yes, yeah. You'd be familiar with Eric von Daniken, The Chariots of the Gods. Yep. That was a book, in the 70s, potentially early 80s. I remember reading when I was when I was a teenager, and I loved that because he was saying that he looked at places like the Nazca Lines and said they only make sense from space or from like up in an aircraft, and looked at the pyramids and he said that there was definitely like interventions in his mind, but there's part of us, maybe it's all those movies from the 50s and 60s that always had aliens as being the bad guys and like slaughtering us and killing us and being the bad guys. But potentially there might have been people that came from a different universe that were friendly and helpful and useful to us and like taught us some engineering skills and were looking to be humanistic to us. Is that how you see it?
Very much so. And I sort of postulated my own theory a few years ago of what if the experiment of Earth they just got fed up with and said these guys aren't worth worrying about anymore. They just fight amongst each other. They rape, they pillage, they this and that. So we're out of here. And that could have happened 5,000 years ago, because there was a lot of raping and pillaging going on. There's a lot going on now. So, what if we're just a failed experiment that's left to sort our own stuff out? And they may not be from space. They may be interdimensional. So it may be simply beings from another dimension. So I think this stuff is fascinating, but it's a wormhole in itself. It's a Pandora's box. You can open it and go deep into it. I like looking at the practicalities of it, and I think that maybe aliens are from a different dimension. But again, it doesn't matter where they're from. I think the point here is that if you're listening to this or watching this and you're going, "Oh no, humans built everything and this is all rubbish," and that, my question is, have you been inside a pyramid? Have you flown over the Nazca lines? Have you been to Sacsayhuaman in Peru and had a look at the stones that are put together that no laser cutter today can do? And if you still have that thought, plus if you've been to the Kaimanawa Ranges in New Zealand, which you're now no longer allowed to go to, and seen the stonework that's thousands of years old in New Zealand that's similar to Sacsayhuaman in Peru, they're great questions. And I think the thing, Peter, that turns everything on its head historically, which you and I learned in school and it's not the truth, is Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. And I was lucky enough around 10 years ago to take a group of people there when most people still didn't know about the site. And this is a site now that there's nothing like it in the world. It's proven to be at least 12,000 years old, which makes it double as old as Stonehenge is to us. So it's as old as we think Stonehenge is, multiplied by 2. There's tools that they've found at the site in order to build it. It's not small. It covers 200 hectares. That's a lot. Only about a tenth of it is uncovered.
Wow.
So, I mean, these are great questions, and it's very, very unique. It doesn't look like other ancient sites from around the world, but it has solar alignments.
Yes. The really interesting thing for me, though, Mike, I think the archaeology is interesting, and we can debate the archaeology. The interesting thing I find is that the ancient texts, even though they're written by different people at different times that had no connection to each other, the spiritual texts, if you want to call them that, they all have very similar themes. They're basically saying the same thing, even though they have like different gods, if I can use that word. And I'm thinking that's where the ancient wisdom comes from. And you think, well, wisdom hasn't really changed. Maybe it's communicated in different ways, but it's not really that
Definitely.
different.
I mean, each of them has a flood myth. I mean, each of the ancient religions has a feathered serpent god. Okay. Thoth, if you like, in Egypt, which is Quetzalcoatl in Mexico. And, then there's more as you go into the Hindu and that type of thing. So a lot of the stories are the same. They might change a little bit, but they are the same. So you look at that and you say, at one point there had to be a body of knowledge that was on the planet. And as people moved and separated and time went on, that body of knowledge was basically the same, but maybe the names changed, i.e. Thoth to Quetzalcoatl, etc. And
Yeah.
And then, but the stories were fundamentally the same. The skills of some of those gods were fundamentally the same. The Book of Enki, which is a great Sumerian book, talks about him being 432,000 years old. 32 is one of the processional numbers. It's the main number of the universe, if you like, and the main ratios used in building the Great Pyramids. I mean, the list of the synchronicities, which is what you're asking, Peter, between these texts, that is just phenomenal. And I think for us, again, in the modern world,
Yes.
what can we take out of that? I mean, yes, it's interesting. And I found myself that, going back 20 years ago, I was writing books and putting this sort of stuff in. There was a few people who knew about it. Now I go to barbecues and people are talking about it and go, who do you think built the pyramids and what did the Sumerians do? And they're just ordinary people, right? They're not people who generally got an interest in this, but because of TV shows like Ancient Aliens and that sort of stuff, people have seen and been more exposed to this stuff. So I think that's really, really useful to get people questioning, because for me, the question becomes, it's always the same question. If all of this was there and it's very different to what we learnt at school and in our history classes, then maybe what we've been taught is not correct. And if what we've been taught is not correct, then maybe the world doesn't work the way in which we were told that it does. And if that's the case, maybe we can truly be anything. Maybe we can truly design our own lives. Maybe we don't have to work in the boring 9-to-5 job that, our parents told us that we had to get. It's those sort of questions that I think that come out of this that are super relevant for us in the modern world and allow us to question things. I remember I was trying to get to Easter Island once and I just kept getting blocked. I was in Santiago in Chile, but I really wanted to go, but I just couldn't get a flight. So I spent the week that I had there every day studied money. And I studied basically the de-engineering of money. And it was fascinating for me, without going into too much detail on the show, to understand how money is actually not real and it doesn't exist. And once I understood that and how money is created, then I suddenly decided that I didn't have to worry anymore about money. I always worried about money. I was an only child who was orphaned at 15, so I was always worried about money my whole life. But that really helped when I understood that money's a created thing. I mean, money comes from salt. That's why we get a celery, saline. And before salt, it comes from water. That's why there's cash flow and we go to the bank and there's currency. It's fascinating when you study all this, that you actually, it gives you a greater sense of freedom in your own life. That's what I find personally.
Yes. And it was only up until about the 90s or 1950s that governments needed gold as a reserve for currencies. Now, I think Richard Nixon was the first one to abrogate that Bretton Woods agreement and basically stopped the requirement for there being any gold reserves for currencies. So governments can invent money. They can change the money supply at whim. And you're right, it really doesn't mean anything. I mean, originally it was a means of exchange, because if you had corn and I had horses, and we wanted to exchange corn for horses, we needed like a currency or like some sort of way of valuing both, so that I could, you could get the horses, I could get the corn, then I could buy something else that I wanted. But it's like thousands of years ago. You're right, it's been bastardized. And I think too, people are more cynical now. They're more pessimistic and more cynical. Maybe when I was growing up, we basically accepted the news, accepted what the government said, accepted what we were told at school. But now, since social media and podcasts, and there's a lot more information available to us, I think we're all very much more skeptical and cynical about what we're told, and we can find out.
Absolutely. Wasn't there a saying in Australia that if Brian said it, it was true, and Brian Naylor was the anchor on the news for like 40 years or something? Well, good.
Yeah, we had two Brians. We had a Brian Naylor in Victoria, and we had Brian Henderson in New South Wales. Yeah. There were two Brians, and it was like Brian told me. So Brian told me it's true. And both of them were there forever. But the other really interesting thing is I've seen some really interesting YouTube clips recently where they record various news services around the world reporting on events, like say reporting on Palestine or reporting on Ukraine or reporting on Trump or whatever they're reporting on, and it's word for word. They'll have like 700 different news stations from around the world, and they're all saying exactly the same thing, which I find really curious and also a bit scary, because you think, well, they're all saying exactly the same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Who's telling them all what to say? You know what I mean? It's very scary. I mean, there's a little bit of margin, I guess, between, say, in US politics, you might get the pro-Trump and the pro-Democrat sides a little different, but all the pro-Democrat sides around the world are saying the same thing. All the pro-Trump sites around the world are saying exactly the same thing, like in exactly the same words, even in different languages.
It's definitely the case.
Which gets a bit scary. You think, well, so who's telling them all to say it? Yeah, so I'm thinking, if that is the case, and you can hear it recorded, that must be the case. So they're all tapping into a global news service that's telling them exactly what to say. And where are they getting it from?
These are very good questions. We're not talking ancient wisdom here. We're talking the reality of the modern world. And I mean, I go into hotels now. If CNN's on the television, I just turn it off.
Yes.
I literally ask for the remote and turn it off because I just don't want to listen to the narrative. And there is a narrative these days. And you know,
there is a narrative, and you need to like toe the corporate line. So if that's the case now, and we are more cynical and more pessimistic than ever, what is it that we can learn from these ancient wisdoms that might inform us to leave
I think in the work
better and happier
that you
lives?
do, Peter, I mean, there's a real simple one, and that's from the I Ching, the Book of Changes. It's a 5,000-year-old book, comes from China. And in 3114 BC, the Emperor Fu He sent his scholars, which literally means observers, out around the land to observe. And, you know, they didn't have the internet or podcasts or anything. They had to look at things. So they would sit there literally for a week and watch a flower bloom or watch a waterfall and things like that. And because Fu He realized that we are a microcosm of the macrocosm of the world. And that became the Book of Changes. Around 1,500 years after it was written, Confucius edited it. Then in the 1920s, a guy called Richard Wilhelm from Germany studied it in China and brought the book to the West. Carl Jung was a personal friend of his. He got involved in the book. And from that, the I Ching came a lot of the personality types that we see today, particularly the Myers-Briggs disc stuff, is direct from the I Ching. So the way in which, you know, we understand each other today is based on documentation done 5,000 years ago. Now, it's modernized in the reports that come out of personality typing today, but it's essentially, you know, we have some clients. It's amazing for me, Chinese clients, you talk about the I Ching, they've never heard of it. That's because of Mao's book burnings. But we have some clients now that literally use as their number one business guidance system the I Ching and their own personal journey through that. And these are highly successful business people. So some people are using the tarot. The tarot came from Egypt. It came from the Templars. The Templars brought it out of Egypt, and that's how the tarot came to the West. So, you know, these are all, they're not woo-woo stuff. They're utilizing basically what we'd call cosmic laws and different ways of doing things that we as human beings have forgotten. We've forgotten them.
So if we do think about like personality and tools like Myers-Briggs and Luminous Spark that look at like character traits that has its core in Jung's work, you think, well, character traits and personality has been around for thousands of years. Maybe we can measure it more accurately now using like modern tools. But people have had personalities. They've been, say, introverted or extroverted for thousands of years. They've been outcome focused or people focused for thousands of years. It doesn't need like a modern tool. It wasn't like just in the 90s that the personality was created. It's always been there. And you think that's one of the key things that people are interested in understanding more about themselves and understanding more about other people. So I can imagine it's thousands of years old. That makes a lot of sense to me. Maybe without filling in a personality assessment like online, but just through observation. I could observe people and say, well, that person is a deeper thinker that likes to spend time alone thinking and studying on things. They're more introverted. Another person is a lot more gregarious and likes being around a lot of people and loses energy when they're alone. You think, well, that person's more extroverted. But no matter what the phrases are that you use, like whatever you call it, it's all the same thing, right? Yeah. So personality's one. What other ancient wisdoms are
I think
relevant
it's
today for
so.
us?
If we look
Mike?
at the work of Pythagoras, and I am wearing his T-shirt, so that's the one that popped up when you reminded me. Most go like I hated Pythagoras at school. Every time somebody said, "Let's do a Pythagorean equation," I'm like, "Oh my goodness, can I just go kick the footy around or something like that?" But in essence, Pythagoras was a mathematician second, a philosopher first, but actually his ground zero was he was a quantum physicist. So he basically said
Okay.
there's a humming and music in the spheres. That was one of his quotes. It's not identical. You'd have to go read it, but that's what he said. The spheres being the planets. Science has found out that every one of the planets vibrates and has a humming, and that our solar system is in tune with itself. So it has a key. It has just like a musical key. The Earth is F sharp, by the way, 7.52 hertz, if my memory serves me correctly. We can't hear it. An elephant can nearly hear it. So it gets down to that sort of level. But what Pythagoras is really saying is he had this place called the Pythagorean Academy, which was, even though he was Greek, born in Samos, so the academy was in the bottom of Italy, in a place called Crotona. I've been to the site of the academy in 2011 or 2012 and spent some time there digging around with archaeologists, in fact. But that academy had two types of people. They called them the Acoustica and the Mathematicoi. So the Mathematicoi studied maths, and they were day students. And so they came and went like we go to school today. The Acoustica studied music and vibration, and they were boarders. And in order to be accepted at that higher level and to come and board there, you had to walk the Rainbow Bridge. And the Rainbow Bridge meant that you did 7 days on red food, 7 days on orange food, 7 days on yellow food, 7 days on green food, 7 days on blue food, 7 days on indigo food, and 7 days on violet food. And after the 49 days, you could come and be part of the Acoustica. And they studied vibration and the way in which things interact with each other. And that's where Pythagoras started writing some deep philosophy about the stars, and also then discovered basically what we have is the 5 modes of music today, which have got Greek names. And, you'd have to be a fairly technical musician like the Lydian scale and things like that to understand them. But all modern music's based on it, whether you're listening to rap or Stairway to Heaven or Bach, right? It doesn't matter. It's all based on Pythagoras' methodology of music, which was found and taught at that place. So, interestingly enough,
Here's me thinking he was just a triangle guy.
So how's that relevant today? Well, here's a story that I think of the last few years it seems to have been removed from the internet somewhat. I couldn't find it when I was looking for it a few years back, but I've known it and used to be there for ages. So I'll tell the story. But when you look at a guitar tuner, okay, so I have a guitar next to me. I've got plenty of them next to me. When you look at a guitar tuner, you'll see it says on the guitar tuner A equals 440, meaning 440 hertz, right? And so that's the basis of tuning today, and tuning musical instruments has a basis. Yeah, that'll be
like
the A on that'll be 440. So if I play an A on my guitar, that'll be 440 hertz at the moment.
Okay.
A middle A. But it didn't used to be that. Pythagoras had a different system. When he had an A back in Pythagorean times, guess what it equaled? I mentioned the number before, 432. So I talked to you about 432,000 years old, the age of Enki, the relationship in the Great Pyramid, 432. It's actually 43,200 there. When you die and you go to Valhalla, there are 432 virgins or something like that. It's in all the ancient texts that come forward. So Pythagoras had the tuning to 432. If you add up the numbers 4, 3, and 2, it equals 9. 9 is the number of harmony. So basically, the musical scale that he developed, which was the one we used, and I say used, was all harmonious. And so it was designed to create harmony in humanity. In 1936, a man stood up at the Global Tuning Conference, believe it or not, they had one, in Copenhagen, and put a paper forward to change tuning, which changed it from 432 to 440. His name was Joseph Goebbels. So why was Hitler's number one henchman delivering a paper at the Global Tuning Conference? You know, the Nazis were very smart. And I mean, they were deep seekers of ancient wisdom. I mean, the SS had a whole unit, I think, called the Anarabi or something like that, that went everywhere from Tibet to wherever to try and find Atlantis. I mean, they searched for stuff from the ancient world. It's very well documented. So Goebbels went to Copenhagen and gave this speech, and lo and behold, influenced everybody, and tuning was changed. And when you look back at it, there's a good and bona fide reason for that. If music, which is a fundamental part of society in almost every culture on the planet, has now become disharmonious, then we are feeling uneasy. And if we feel uneasy, we don't feel confident. And if we don't feel confident, we search for a leader to lead us. Who's the leader? Hello, Adolf Hitler.
Yeah.
Strangely enough, music's never been changed back to 432 after that. I think, you know, people just think it's hogwash. But if anybody wants to test this, there's a great video on YouTube you can go and have a listen to. Whoever it is that did the video plays Stairway to Heaven in 440, which is the same key that Jimmy Page played it in, and then plays it in 432. And you listen to it and you go, that feels better. It just feels different. So now there's a lot of 432 meditations coming out that people are bringing out and stuff like that, and other frequencies that come from the Pythagorean frequency. So when you look at the relevance of ancient wisdom, I see you're making a note, very smart. When you look at the relevance of ancient wisdom to today, it can be something as simple as that. And there is an app. I haven't used it, but there is an app around that you can take any song and put it in there, and it'll change it to a 432 style of song. So essentially, it'll detune it by a few points. Let's just say that. I may be a guitar player, but I didn't study classical music, so I play by ear. But it'll detune it a little bit to 432.
A 432 meditation, that would be at a different.
It'll be at a different frequency.
Would it?
So
the
best way I could describe
different frequency. Okay.
Would be,
didn't
know I'd have to use a guitar on this, would be, here's your A. Now that's at 440 because it's tuned to a guitar tuner.
Yeah.
If I tune it down a little bit, that might be something around 432. So it'll just subtly change all of the music.
Okay.
But those subtle changes will touch our soul in a much different way.
So do you think the ancient meditations, like I'm thinking like the ancient Buddhist meditations in particular,
yes, they were F-sharp in the 432 base, the OMs. Yep, they were.
There was a lot of chanting and humming. Yeah, because there are a lot of very rhythmic chanting. I'm thinking that if you listen to the ancient masters, it does sound different than the modern versions. And it resonates much more closely with your spirit if you listen to the ancient, like the Om Mani Padme Hum, that ancient stuff from the
very
old school
much
monks.
so. And I think if you listen to Mongolian throat singers, if you've ever had the opportunity to listen to those, and folks, if you haven't, go and put that into YouTube. But there's nothing like being in Mongolia with them, which I have been. I wouldn't doubt that they're in those keys, because the way in which they touch and resonate with you is just absolutely phenomenal. It reaches a part of your soul that just can't be reached. And I think this is also part of, people seeking to levitate and do things like that. I mean, there's photos from the 90s where Tibetan monks are moving rocks with trumpets. I mean, so I have no doubt that stuff could happen.
They're also drying wet blankets, like they're sitting in the middle of Tibet in winter, like it's snowing, and someone puts a wet blanket on them, and
that's
they
pretty
can
cool.
steam the blanket
I've heard
dry.
that.
They can create that much heat in their bodies. That's pretty cool, and that's been there's been science around that to prove that these guys can do that, which is quite extraordinary. So I'm just thinking for people listening, Mike, that are just thinking about like more practical sort of advice, like more practical ancient wisdom, if you like. What might we say? Might we just say three things, like three really practical things people could pick up on that the ancients would be, if the ancients could be talking to them now, what they would say.
It becomes the most simple things, and it becomes quotes like,
yeah,
don't look outwards until you've looked within. And that to me is just so profound because, we're constantly seeking masters outside. We're watching our YouTubes, listening to our podcasts, waiting for that master to give us the advice. But actually what the ancients are saying, they're saying that all of the wisdom sits within you. You just have to ask the right questions to access it.
Yeah.
Another simple one,
or create the right environment for it to arise. Like if you meditate appropriately for long enough, that arises in you, which is at the heart of those Buddhist sutras, like allow it to rise.
Another one is to stand in stillness.
Okay.
And what that literally means is it means take time to be at one with nature, and that's the basis of Tai Chi. So, when you see people doing Tai Chi in the park, go and try and do it. It's not easy, okay? And you'll see 90-year-olds that are fitter than half the 30-year-olds that are walking past them going, that's stupid. So it's a lot of the ancient wisdom is actually about the body. I mean, there's a reason this is called the temple on the body, and I'm pointing to my head if you're listening to this. I mean, and that's the temple is where you go to meditate.
Yeah.
The temple is where you go to pay honorage to God. So this is about the temple inside you. Even the word brain, be rain. In other words, allow things to flow. I mean, the ancients used a lot of words to symbolize something. So the word flow, we always talk about flow in the modern world. That comes from the word wolf. It's just wolf turned around. So wolf was seen to be the animal in ancient times that was able to master the forest. So it had the flow.
So we've got one more. We've got look inwards before you look outwards. We've got stand in stillness.
My third one comes from a book called The 5 Rings of Power by Miyamoto Musashi, the greatest samurai of all time. Why was he the greatest samurai? Because he lived till 65 and he fought to the death many, many times. So he must have been pretty good. But he wrote over 90 books and lived in a cave. And he wrote a book called The 5 Rings of Power. Now, this is a fairly long quote, so I'm not going to remember it word from word, but I'll give you the thrust of it and how important it is. He talks about there's a natural flow of energy in the universe, and each one of us can harness that flow of energy and utilize it for ourselves. We can't use that energy for personal gain or wealth creation, but we can use it to make the world a better place. But beware, for within that energy lies incredible power. Now, you might look at that and go, okay, so what does that mean? Well, George Lucas thought it was a fantastic saying because he built Star Wars around it. Star Wars and May the Force be with you, Luke, comes from Miyamoto Musashi and ancient wisdom. And it's all about the invisible force, the energy of the universe that we can harness to do incredible things, whether it be to become the best student. I didn't know this. This is so funny, but because I was so lazy at school and because I was orphaned at 15, I wanted to pass, but I was too busy, playing football and doing other things. I bought a book for 2 cents at a bazaar that was called Pyramid Power, and my best friend who I live with and his parents, we built pyramids out of cardboard, hung them over our bed. I put my school books under my pillow, and that's how I studied for my exams when I did my finals in school, and I passed. So that's what, with a pyramid over my head. Every night at sleep, we both did. We were nuts, right? But I think what Musashi's saying is he's talking about what these days is called the law of attraction. And he's fundamentally telling you that
Yes.
it is
Yeah.
there. There's an energy and we can tap into it, but we can't use it. We can't use law of attraction to go, I want $1 million, and then $1 million arrives. But we have to be aware of it, because within it we unleash incredible power. So if we are able to master it, we can use it for good or bad, and it can destroy us as much as help us. And that's what happened in Star Wars, of course. So if you haven't seen the movie, go and watch it. So I think that one for me is a great one, because it's a reminder
Movies.
that everything we need is around us. We don't have to go further than that. And yet we have to be careful with it, and we have to treat it like we'd treat the most precious gem, because that is the most precious gem.
And that's a lovely place to finish our conversation, Peter. Mike. I could talk to you all day. You're no doubt got thousands of ideas and suggestions for us. But for now, I just wanted to thank you deeply for being
It's been
a
an
guest
absolute pleasure
on Growth Tales.